And now, let's play with models, particularly the CBS National House model, which will offer us some guidance on what we can expect, perhaps, next Tuesday night. Joining us is the Director of Elections for CBS News, one of the smartest people I know, Anthony Salvanto from New York. Anthony, welcome.
Right back at you, Mark. How are you?
So can you just explain to me, for us lay people, the average dumb person like me, what this model is and how you put it together?
Okay, well, Mark, you and I and everyone always throws around this time of year the national House vote, what some people call the generic ballot, right, where we say Republicans have X, Democrats have Y on a national level for the House. But when you see that in polls, what does it really mean? Because after all, the House is 435 separate individual elections, not a national vote. So we have to translate that. And more specifically, if we want to put it into numbers, how would particular districts be affected or less affected by something like a wave? That's the other metaphor everyone always throws around, right? Well, which districts are more susceptible to getting washed off with a wave, and
right,
which ones would be more steady?
What sort of variables do you incorporate, and how do you do the weighting? In other words, how do you put together 435 separate races across the country? How do you figure this out?
Well, it took a lot of time. And what we did was we looked at the historical voting data for all the districts in the House going back a few cycles, and then also their individual characteristics, such as whether they were open seats or there was an incumbent running, which party had held them, the demographics of the district as well. So a lot of variables like that for each in particular district, and then you take the national vote in that year and you see how much each of those districts could be expected to contribute to that national vote, which is, after all, just an assemblage of those districts. When you see that historically, then you learn something that you can then apply to 2010, whereas there's an awful lot of races in play, and then you get our results.
So the model that you have now has Republicans, if they get 52% of the national vote, that's probably enough for them to gain control of Congress. Can you go through some iterations of that?
Sure. Once we learn about how the districts swing or flip, if you will, based on their characteristics in the national vote, you apply that this year and you say, well, if the Republicans get, we see about 52% or greater of the national vote, that should swing enough districts to give them back the House. Now, that's not quite a prediction. It's a simulation based on what we see today. But what you see is that a lot of these districts that are marginal, something usually closer to, imagine that 49, 50, 51% Democratic-Republican district, you can imagine flipping over a little more easily if there's some kind of a national wave. So a lot of those flip, and yes, the Republicans would end up probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 226 seats, but there's a range around that estimate, and I'll just say quickly, of about 11 seats each way. Now, you can think of that a little bit like a margin of error on a poll. This is not a poll, but what you want to think is that range shows you that there's still an awful lot of toss-up competitive races out there that could still go either way.
Well, how many? Let's talk in specifics here. What do you see the landscape looking like 8 days before the election? How many seats are in play? How many seats are leaning to the Republican Party?
Mm-hmm. Well, we see a very large number. There's 85 seats in play right now, and the disproportionate number of those, 77 by our count, are held by Democrats. So with that kind of playing field, you imagine, of course, that a national vote will be composed of a lot of districts that are swinging back towards the Republicans. So you figure if, given that scenario, Republicans get maybe 51% of the national vote, now the model says we would expect that the control of the House to be pretty tight, maybe a toss-up, maybe a narrow majority for one part or the other. And if it ends up being even, and let's see if the Democrats can bring it back to that. In a lot of polls, as you know, it's not even. But if they bring it back to that, then we see a scenario where the Democrats could be able to narrowly hold on to control. And that cushion in there, in that sensitivity range, if you will, is really based on the fact that Democrats have that majority cushion at the moment.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for joining us. And you can read more about the 2010 National House Model on CBSNews.com's Political Hot Sheet.